Well, last week we talked about sacred awareness, and sacred awareness is sort of the larger context of the idea of being awake and aware to this greater reality, whatever we want to call it, whether you call it God or spirit or divine intelligence or whatever you call it, mother love. It doesn't really matter what we call it, but what does matter is that we become aware of it. What matters is, it's just like, it's like the proverbial story of the fish that's swimming around the ocean looking for the water, That is our reality, that we live and move and have our being in this reality called God or spirit. And most of the time, we're aware of everything but that. We're aware of everything that's missing, broken, or not working in our life, and that everything that needs to happen and change in order for us to be okay. So that divine awareness is the complete reversal of that default nature that we have, and it's to be aware that there is something constantly sourcing us in every given moment in time that would be the end all of our seeking and our searching. And that divine awareness is nothing more than coming right back to the truth of our being. It's not reaching out to some unknown God that's somehow off the planet in some heavenly abode somewhere that we have to get its attention and finally convince it or coax it into wanting us and loving us and giving us this blessing. We believe in unity, as Cheryl said so well, that we believe that there is a divine nature that all of us have, and that there's no more work for the divine to do for us to realize that. It for us to realize that is to lay the responsibility and the possibility of that realization right where it belongs, which is with you and I. Some people think that's good news, and some people think it's bad news. Some people think, well, it's really good news that there is nothing apart from me. There isn't some notion of a God that's up there somewhere, and that I have to somehow earn my way to have that connection someday, somewhere. When things at the end of my life or whatever. And that's a good news perspective. The other part of it is when we realize that it's right here and it's right now and we're not realizing it and it's up to us, it puts a pretty heavy onus of responsibility upon us to have spiritual practices that sort of close the gap. So it depends on how you look at it, yes? And of course, in unity, we don't all look at it the same way. We have our affirmations and we have our daily words, but we don't all look at it the same way. And what I've noticed over time is that there is quite a wide gap of understanding that people have around this idea of divine nature. And when I was in ministerial school, and there was even people in school who had already, supposedly would really understand unity, were still sort of praying to an unknown, distant God, to a God outside of themselves. And we come by that naturally in the sense because our normal orientation to life is according to the senses. And our senses speak to separation, don't they? If we just trust on our eyes and our ears and our touch and taste, those all speak to an external reality and that we are separate from. We're separate from each other. We're separate from life. We're separate from our good. If we interpret our good as being conditions or circumstances or material possessions or events in our life or graduating from college or retirement or any of these sort of notions of situations or circumstances that are not yet currently present, all of those speak to an idea of separation. And that's what our senses give us. But the quantum scientists, the ones who are helping us understand reality as it really is, magnified by the possibility of being able to see very, very small, minute particles of reality, are giving us an understanding of reality that belies this notion of separation. As I mentioned in the first service, we might look at each other and see us as discrete and distinct persons and objects, separate and distinct and apart from each other. But if you got very close to any one of us with a microscope, and eventually it would have to become an electron microscope, but you would first find at the level of the skin, which is where, my senses tell me this is where I end. And anything on the other side of the skin is not me anymore. It's other. It's something other than me. But if you were to look at that with a microscope, you would find that it's not just, this apparent barrier, but it is made up of cells. And then if you break that open even more, like even deeper, then those cells are made up of what? Molecules. And then you go expose the molecules for what they're made up of, and you find that they're made up of atoms. And you look even deeper because of the quantum mechanics laws that we understand now, and they can actually look at what atoms are made of, and you have these subatomic particles. And then when the physicists look at those subatomic particles, they really find that there's very little volume there. There's virtually nothing. It's like 99% nothing. And so when they get to that nothing stage, then the quantum scientists say, well, we don't really know what it is, but it seems to have some sort of energy or some kind of intelligence to it. Because we've discovered that there's some kind of communication that's going on. There's correlation between things that seem to be separate in the quantum field. And so really, when you get right down to it, this that looks solid and separate is this energy field. And that's true of me and every one of you. And all the chairs and this building and this whole world is made up of this energy. And there is no barrier or boundary where my energy stops and yours starts. There is no way. If this is what the mystics have said all along, if you go deeply into consciousness, if you look deeply within the mind, if you look at awareness itself, which is just looking at your ability to be aware of self without looking at anything, just in a purely subjective way, you find there's no boundaries to that. Awareness does not stop at my head. My head is located in awareness. Just as we understand from the quantum perspective that there's no boundaries to the energy that makes up you or I, there's no boundary to the consciousness, and this is where quantum science and mystical spirituality begin to merge into one very sort of cohesive explanation of reality. And when we understand that, then we begin to say that this notion of oneness that the mystics have talked about for thousands of years is not just some spiritual mumbo jumbo that's just contained in the crazy minds of a few people who have smoked some wacky weed or had some mushroom out of body psychedelic experience, but that this actually is the fundamental underlying reality that's born out not just from the intuitive nature or the spiritual nature, but it's being born out by the rational understanding. Does that make sense? That we are beginning to come up with more of a unified theory of everything. And that unified theory of everything is going to require that we can no longer argue against what's true. You can continue to argue against what's true, but it will cause increasing amounts of suffering. Because the more I argue for separation, the more I'm going to suffer. And the more I align myself with the reality of connection and being, the more I am going to be blessed, because then I am in agreement with the universe. I'm in agreement with the way things really are. And so all of this was not said at the first service, so I don't know if that's good or bad. It was said in a different way, yeah, I guess it would be true to say. But what I wanted to say, what I will say to you now, and which, as I said at the first service, is that when it comes to spiritual understanding, paradox rules. Paradox emerges as a way of understanding these more esoteric spiritual ideas. And paradox is not, our normal mortal mind doesn't like paradoxes too much, because here's why. Definition: a seemingly absurd or self-contradictory statement or proposition that, when investigated or explained, may prove to be well-founded or true. Now, the surface mind is not really comfortable with absurd, self-contradictory statements. We want it to make sense, right? And so, but if we understand that the higher truth, which is always leading us to where we really, really, really want to go, where we really, really want to be grounded in, is paradoxical, then we can stay present for the blessing of the paradox. And this is what spiritual growth is. When you realize that the fruits of spiritual growth are more important than the discomfort that you experience in sitting with the paradox or sitting with the contradiction. And that's where many of you are. I know that. because I can watch you. I can see your minds. You're wanting to wrap your mind around something that is more true for you because you've experienced, as we all have, the limited notions, handed to us by culture or by the world or by our senses, that this is all there is. And our intuition tells us there is more than what our senses tell us. Our intuition tells us, as the mystics have said, that there is a greater reality to our being. And it is transcendent to our physical form. It's transcendent to our circumstances. It's greater than anything that we can contain or measure in terms of form or limitation. And in order for us to dapple with that awareness, we have to be willing to sit with the contradictions and the paradoxes, and that's part of our journey. The surface mind, which is the pre-awakened state, which most of us are familiar with, except those of you who are already enlightened, and you guys can go ahead and go get some snacks or something. Just leave us so we don't feel bad in your presence. Those of us that are still climbing up, with the rock of ignorance up the steep hill of enlightenment, we're still here. But we seek for happiness through objects, and we seek for love through other people. I mean, now they're not supposed to feel bad about that. You're just supposed to realize that that's just the human normal way that the senses tell us, right? For the reasons I outlined earlier, feels that those things are apart from us, so it's an object that's going to make me happy. I decide that. We don't think we decide that, but it is a choice that we decide that. And if I decide that love for me is going to mean another person, that's going to give me the experience of love that I yearn for, that I seek. There's no recognition of an inner kingdom. There's no recognition that the only modality to get our needs met is from within. We think it's from outside in. And again, that's paradoxical when we realize that what we're trying to feel inside of ourselves, how would that be something that could come from outside of ourselves? And the master teachers, Jesus, of course, is one we quote here most often. He was really comfortable with paradox because his primary message was that what you are seeking is what you're looking from. What you are after is who you really are. And he said that the kingdom of God is at hand, or the kingdom of God is within. This realm of well-being that is seemingly so elusive, and we hook and tie into circumstances and conditions as being the conditions that stand between us and that experience, is already within us. It's already my nature. It's my nature. So I'm seeking and not finding in life if I'm looking outside of myself. And so he had these great paradoxical statements that would perplex the disciples of his time and us at times as well. He said things like this: the last would be first, the humble would be exalted, and the giver is the receiver. Confounding, contradictory statements. How could it possibly be that in giving I would receive, for example? It's just the mortal service mind says, if I give, you receive, and I have less, right? So how could it be that in giving I could receive? What aspect of my consciousness, or how must I hold that notion in order for me to know that that's actually a truth and not just some lofty contradictory statement that makes no mortal sense to my mind? Well, spiritual growth and that kind of realization can come to us in two ways. In our mission statement here, we say we are here to realize and express our divine nature, right? We say that every week. And the order in which we lay that out is to say that it's realization first, and then comes expression. But a paradoxical view of that statement would be the flip-flop of that, which say, in expressing, I will realize. So today I want to talk to you about sacred service. This is another one of these great paradoxes, because all of us want to have this experience of well-being and happiness and fulfillment. And to the unchallenged surface mind, this would mean that I need to be a receiver. Does that make sense to the surface mind? Just nod your head. I know you think you're enlightened, but remember those moments when you didn't think that way. For the new people, so they'll feel fine, Because they, of course, the new people might be more enlightened than we are, which I've always learned that lesson the hard way, too. People go out going, yes, well, I'm giving a lecture at UCSB this weekend on the 5 paths to an awakening, and looks like you could use that. So I never make that assumption again. So anyway, through the mortal mind, this notion of it's apart from me and I have got to do something and I have to take it in. So the paradox is, how could it be that some form of expression of my spiritual nature would precede and be the condition under which I would know that for sure? And that's where sacred service comes in. Now, when I say sacred service, it's not just putting a bow and a ribbon on this idea of serving. It actually means not the kind of service that we're talking about or the form of the service that we're talking about. It's where that service comes from. Does that make sense? It's where are you serving from? Because if we come from that mind that says that if I give, then I have less, then nothing's sacred about that, right? What that will do is that will reinforce your ego's perspective, which means I'm lacking, I'm limited, and if whatever I give, I'm going to have even less. And you may have more, but I'm going to be down a quart because I haven't given to you. And that's not what we want to reinforce. We want to reinforce this part of us that's vast and unlimited. Remember I said there's no boundaries to who and what we really are? So how could it be that I could activate this sense of boundarylessness in which my giving would only enhance the realization of the no boundariness of my being, as opposed to a way of giving in which I felt like the boundaries just moved in when I made a gift. Does that make sense? So we do this not out of some grandiose altruistic state of saving the world or serving the world, or we do this from the most authentic reason possible. Because this is the kind of service that really will serve not only you, but the world, is that when you serve in such a way that it puts you in touch with your deepest nature. And when you get in touch with your deepest nature and you serve from that place, there is an increase of good from the service that you've provided, which does spill over onto the other. But then you have this realization of the deeper part of your nature that is unlimited, that is capacious, that has the possibility of giving and receiving in the giving, as Jesus said. You had this other line, but boy, I'll tell you, this challenges us a lot. We liked the first one, but we didn't really like the second one. The first one is love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. We love that one. Oh, yes, I love God, and I pray, and I meditate, and I can really love God, because God don't have any skin on, right? I mean, that view. But now love your neighbor as yourself. Well, we have trouble with that. But see, remember, Jesus was not talking about anything other than oneness. So he wasn't saying, there's God, and then there's your neighbor. And then there's yourself. Sort of the trinity of separation, which that would be. God, neighbor, self. God. See, I'm going to love God. Okay, I'm going to go pray and meditate. Now I'm going to go love my neighbor. Oh, this is so exhausting, especially the mood she's in right now. Oh. And then I'm going to come and love myself. What Jesus was talking about was oneness. It's a non-dual notion that God, other, self, different aspects of the same reality, different forms extended out from the one presence, one power, one life, one love. That the forms that show the separation are even Einstein said this, reality is an illusion, a persistent one at that. And it's given to us by our senses. It's not given to us from on high, from the ultimate realization of truth. It's given to us as a result of us using this very limited perspective on life, which tells me that you are separate from me. But Jesus was saying, love your neighbor as yourself. Not like yourself, not love your neighbor like you would serve yourself or like you would love yourself. Love your neighbor as if your neighbor were yourself. No difference. And when we do that, when we have that as a context from which we draw this impulse or this intention to serve each other, we are expanded in the realization from which we come from. But if we serve from a place of, oh yeah, I guess the church needs my help. It's work day Saturday, so I'm going to get my shovel and I'm going to show up and maybe I can dig a little bit and then I'm going to go home and put something on my back and I've done my thing. And I'm making jokes of this, but I know none of you do this. But we might do this in some. I've not seen that here, honestly. But you may do this in some part of your life. There may be that sense where you serve not to expand your sense of self, but you serve in some way as a sort of a compensation for some sense of lack or limitation that you either perceive in the world or you perceive in yourself. Like I'm trying to compensate, well, I didn't show up for her birthday party, but I guess maybe I ought to, go and take care of her dog, for a couple of days. And I'm really excited about doing that. And then maybe we'll be even, and maybe when my birthday comes around, she'll send me a card or anyway, so that's not the energy we want, is it? I don't want that energy coming my way, nor does the church want that energy coming its way. But what we do want, we're here to help you realize and express your divine nature. So everything we suggest you do or invite you to do, whether it's giving your time, talent, treasure, anything, it should be not because we need it, but because of who you are. Because of who you are. The very extension or expression of which would increase that awareness. And in the consequence of you growing spiritually and becoming more aware of who you are, yes, things would get done, but what a win-win, wouldn't it be? What about if you went to work with that notion? That might be a little bit more challenging. Some of you have jobs that I'm not sure I'm going to stay here, and I certainly have had that job in my life and had to kind of drag myself into it. But what if even the notion that if you don't in your passion and your work, but you realize that if you were coming from that part of you in which the struggle to be present for your work, what allowed you to transcend that smaller self and really just access that part of you that can just love this moment instead of having to, marry the future, What if you could just fall in love with this moment, this little one thing that you do where you bring presence to it? I had to do that at the end of my career in the insurance thing. I had to just take it a moment at a time and bring as much mindfulness and as much heart as I could to each person I was talking to and each task that I did. Because if I had to kind of embrace the whole journey and see it into the endless future, it was overwhelming. But if we're with someone, if you're with a child and you can be with the child, just like a child is, how they're just present in the moment, they're not worried about how they're going to get through college, for example, when they're down looking at roly-polies in the grass. I mean, they're just concerned about, being present for the possibility of the joy of this moment. When we break down our life into little pieces in which we can bring our whole self, our love, our peace, our joy, in whatever modicum we can muster in that moment, we have a holy experience. And it doesn't mean that we have to fall in love with the entire outpicturing of this activity over time, but it does mean that for this moment, we are accessing our true self. And if we are accessing our true self, not only will we be a blessing to those we serve and to that which we serve, but to who? To us. Because, again, there is no separation. There's an Indian proverb that says, when I don't know who I am, I serve you. And when I know who I am you. Which means I serve me. And that's what oneness is at its highest extension and its highest expression and its highest realization. And we may not get there in one simple act of service. But it's important for us to realize that when we're doing these things, are we doing it from a place that's going to foster a deeper appreciation of who we are and our oneness? Or are we giving testimony and bearing witness to some illusion, as Einstein said, of separation? And according to the decision we make around that will determine whether we grow into this greater sense of peace and well-being that we are really already are and not yet realizing, or we will deepen the experience of separation. And the last thing I want to share with you is I think one of the most beautiful teachings in the New Testament was when Jesus was having the Last Supper, the Passover experience, and he was deciding that he wanted to wash the feet of his disciples. And so, he took off his clothes and put on his robe and got his towel, and he was going through this ritual. And when he got to Peter, Peter said to him, "Master, are you going to wash my feet?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "You will not wash my feet." Peter was in that mindset of separation. He made Jesus someone that was special and the one who should be served, not the one who should be serving. Do we understand that? Some are worthy and some are not worthy. This is the greatest notion of separation. Jesus was a teacher of oneness and unity, and that to love one is to love all. To love one is to love God. As you see me, you see my Father. As you love me, you love God. This was Jesus' teaching. So he said to him, I'm going to get it right this time, because I didn't have the book the first time. Left it in my office. Wait, hang on. Don't leave yet. It's coming. When he came to Simon Peter, Simon said to him, "Are you, my Lord, going to wash my feet?" And Jesus answered, saying to him, "What I am doing, you do not now know, but later you will understand." This is spiritual awakening. Then Simon Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." And Jesus said to him, "If I do not wash you, you have no part in me." Jesus was not doing this for himself. He already experienced oneness, but he could see from Peter, and of course Peter is the one, that denied him 3 times and really didn't see the Christ in him until somewhere later in the story. But he knew that Peter saw this separation, and he knew that by him washing his feet, where Peter would think, "Oh no, that would only be me doing that for you." And Jesus said, "No, I will do that for you." He would dissolve this sense of separation, and he would realize that it is in serving people that we see them as part of us, and that it's essential that we see people as part of us, and service is a way that we can do that. And to deny somebody that would be to belie the truth of our connection, of our intimate oneness reality. You must let me give you evidence that I see you as being part of me. Do not deny me that. And then he went and he did that, and he did the other disciples as well. And then he says, when he had washed their feet, he put on his robes and he sat down and he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and what you say is well, for I am. If I then, your teacher, have washed your feet, now how much more should you wash one another's feet? For I have given you this as an example, so just as I have done to you, you should also do. Truly, truly, I say to you." That's when there's 2 trulies in there, you got to listen. If it's a 1 truly, it's like, 2 trulies, pay attention, it's going to be good. "Truly, truly, I say to you, there is no servant who is greater than his master, and no apostle who is greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are those of you who do them." Blessed are those of you who do them. I'm going to loop back to what I said earlier. If it's not realization leading to expression, it can be expression leading to realization. Blessed are those of us who do. Blessed are those of us who way to serve. And it is in serving that we discover that there's a part of us that gets opened up that we didn't even know we had, which was my experience in San Luis Obispo 20 years ago when I first experienced service for the first time, when I hadn't been serving anybody but myself my whole life, trying to, acquire and get possessed and get more stuff so that I'd be happy, and I wasn't. And when I began to serve and I had that experience of something opened in me, I didn't know what this was, but somehow in the act of serving to this spiritual community, I actually felt greater, not diminished for having done something for the church, which was the notion I thought I had in the beginning. But I ended up giving more. And I talked to many of the people at the first service who went out the door going, yeah, I tell people all the time, I get more out of it than I'm giving. And when you don't know that, this spiritual practice is so powerful. And if we're going to grow spiritually, we have to find a way to be a giver to life. Not because we're all sitting around going, give me, give me, give me, and that you need to somehow fill some illusory hole that we have, or that the church needs you. It goes without saying that this is a community that relies upon volunteer energy, but that's not the primary reason to do it. Because if you do that, then you're going to give validity to a sense of lack and limitation. We don't want any part of that. We want you to serve so that you expand your sense of who you are. So in giving, you do receive, and in receiving, you become more capacious. Your heart expands. Your capacity for connection, your capacity for well-being grows. And then your capacity for serving, coming from an even higher level of service, blesses you and blesses the giver at the same time. Blesses the receiver and the giver at the same time. That's what this community is all about. That's what our mission statement is about. And we don't step outside of our mission statement to get the work done. We don't step outside of our mission statement to pay the bills. We ask you to give not because the church needs your money. We ask you to give because of who you are. And giving from who you are is an expanding idea where we build this notion of abundance in this community, because we're now enlarging our understanding that we are part of this infinite one that is unbounded and infinite. And there's no lack, there's no limitation. That's what we're building here. And as we do that, then all of our needs will be met, because that's the spiritual truth anyway. But if we come from a place of lack and limitation, we will continue to build the thought system that's based upon the illusion of our separation or not being enough. We have no interest in doing that. You can remind us of this from time to time if you see us doing it differently. But that's part of what I think I'm here for as your spiritual leader. I don't have to get so embroiled in all of the machinations of the church that I can't hopefully stand outside that and remember the spiritual truth of doing what we are here to do, and to awaken ourselves to this greater truth and take care of what needs to be done here, but from a consciousness that helps us grow. Amen? Amen. Amen. Good. All right. That's it for today. I didn't get through the whole book, but there's always another week. Thank you, God.